Who's the prayer leader?
Si Ian, sir.
Hello, Ian. Are you there? Hello? Aray, ikaw nga, uy.
Yes, sir.
Sige, go lang ga.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, thank you for this wonderful day. Please guide us in our Sockstad session today. Amen.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, 9H.
Afternoon, sir.
Okay, so for our session this afternoon, we will just continue the last part of our discussion before we have our worksheet. And then tomorrow, you will have our long test. So for the past, we discussed the approaches to national output yesterday, along with the nominal and the real GDP and GNI. So just a recap of what we have discussed yesterday is that first, there are three approaches, and for every approach, there are different components. For the first approach to calculating the national output, we have the income approach. And for income approach, we add all the income incurred in all the major sectors in the economy. And then followed by expenditure approach, wherein we add all the expenses, the spending, or the consumption of all the major sectors in the economy. And lastly, we have the industrial origin approach, wherein we add all the production for the different production sectors in the economy. Then we proceed with the discussion on the real versus nominal prices, or the real GDP and or GNI, and nominal GDP or GNI. When we say nominal GDP or GNI, what price are we using, Gane? Sa nga presyo atong ginagamit when we calculate for the GDP using nominal.
Increase.
Ha? Increase?
Increase.
Ay, sorry. What specific prices are we using if we
Current.
have nominal prices, then we are using current prices, meaning we are using the price for that certain year. On the other hand, when we say real GDP or real GNI, we are using the prices for
Constant or fixed prices.
okay, fixed prices or constant prices. So we are using a selected base year for the calculation of the GDP and the GNI. For example, let's say that we want to know the growth or the improvement of the GDP and GNI for 10 years from 2010 to 2020. Then we use the real GDP wherein we select a base year. We have a certain year wherein that year, the price of that year will be used for the calculation of the GDP for those 10 years that we will be calculating the GDP or GNI. So when do we use GDP, nominal GDP or GNI, and real GDP or GNI? So we can use nominal GDP or GNI if we want to know the output or how well we are doing for that certain year. And we can also use that data in comparison or relative to the other countries in terms of their production for that specific year. On the other hand, we can use, or it would be appropriate to use real GDP or GNI if we wanted to know the well being, the economic well being, or how much we were able to improve for the past years. So for the real GDP or the real GNI, we will select, as I've said, you will select a certain year para makalculate nato ang GDP or GNI to eliminate the increase in price of the goods and services. That way, mas clear na the only reason, if ever there will be an increase in the GDP or GNI, then the only reason for increase is because nag-improve gid atong production and not because of the increase in the price of the goods and services. Okay, so now we move on to the calculation of growth rates. And then that would be the last part of our discussion. And then we'll just wrap things up before we have our worksheet. So let's continue for a moment because it's so loading here. Okay, so growth rates are the growth rates allow economists rather to track the progress of the increase of the wealth of a certain country. So when we want to know how well the country is doing, it would be easier for us to know that if we look at the growth rates right away. So for us to be able to compute for the growth rate, we will use the data of the GDP and the GNI. So muna ato ang gamiton. So para makabalota whether we are doing well, if nag-increase ba or is there a growth in our economy or not, then we have to look at the growth rates. Now, how do we solve for growth rates? Here is the formula to solve the growth rate. We have current year minus previous year over previous year or divided by previous year times 100. Now, asa man nagikan si current year and previous year? So let's have a sample data here. As you can see, we have year 2017, 18, and 19. And for every year, there is a corresponding data for the GDP. So we have the GDP for 2017, GDP for 2018, and GDP for 2019. Now, how do we know asa ang current and ang previous price? I mean, ang previous year, sorry. So, if you are going to solve for the growth rate of 2018, then it means to say that your current year is 2018. Then the previous year is 2017. If you are looking for the growth rate of 2019, automatically your current year is that year, the 2019. The data that you will be using is for year 2019. Now, question, can we solve for the growth rate of 2017? Yes or no? Can we solve for the growth rate of 2017?
No, sir.
Oh, why man?
I think yes.
Based on the data here lang.
Oh,
No,
no,
sir.
sir.
No, why?
Wala data for the
Wala
previous
for
year.
2016.
Okay, very good. There is no data for the previous year or sa 2016. So therefore, we will go straight right with 2018. So before I explain on how to solve that one, I want you to try for yourself in solving the growth rate. Just follow the formula as shown on the screen. And of course, when you say current year, dili nimo isolve ang year ha. You will solve for the GDP for that year. Di si mapareha ka kaganina ang so sure di gid ako makuha ang answer iya ring gigamit kay ang year gyud gihimo ginin 2019 minus 2018 o diba? So please use the data for the year that you will be computing for. I'll give you 5 minutes to solve on your own and then keep your answers to yourself so that we can explain the answers once everyone is done. Solve for 2018 and 2019 ha. Are you done? Okay. Excuse me, sorry. What's the answer for 2018?
11.43%.
Ah, okay. I forgot to round it to ask to tell you to round it off to two decimal places. Anyway, okay. So yes, the answer is 11.43%, and the other one is for 2019.
2.56%.
Okay, 2.56%. Now, how did we get that one for the benefit of ano for those who are still confused? Sige, let's have this one tinamban method. If you are using scientific calculator, it would be easier for you to solve right away, diba? With the use of parentheses. But if you don't have scientific calculators, then let's go over the formula one by one. So we have here 780. 780 is for the current year, which is 2018. And then 700 is for 2017 na data. So since our formula is current minus previous divided by previous, that's why we have here 780 minus 700 over 700. Now the thing there is, if you are not using a calculator, you will not arrive with this answer. I mean scientific calculator, dili ka mo abot ani nga answer. Ano man, for you to do that, you have to solve the first one above pa, above sa. So you have to get the answer with this one, 780 minus 700, which will give you 80, and then then I divide with 700, and then the answer, which is 0.11428 times 100 will be 11.428. Then that will give you, since we have to round it off to two decimal places, then this will give you an answer of 11.43%. Okay? So if ever you will be asked to show the solution, please do it like this. Or okay raman gyapon if nag-scientific calculator mo, you stop with this one. Pero it would be better to have it like this in detail. Nasabtan ba? I hope that's easy for you. Di ba? Kay, kumaingan ra ba ko og easy, man. Di may matuo sa imong easy, sure. Okay na? Sayon, Resha, no? Totoo naman sa kong easy this time. Okay, so going back, so as I've said, then same goes with 2019. Your current year is, the current data for that year is 800 minus 780 over 780 times 100, then that will give you 2.56%. Now, what does that mean? It means that for year 2018, the GDP is, for 2017, the GDP is 700, and for 2018, the GDP is 780. Therefore, there is an 11.43% increase in the GDP for year 2018 from 2017. Nidako kay bale ang ato ang GDP by 11.43%. 'Di ba? It's easier to understand na okay 11 ang growth rather than tanaw-tanaw lang nimo ang number. Although you can see that there is an increase in the data sa GDP, but it would be better to look at it in percentage. Same with 2019, there is an increase of 2.56 rather percent, which is lower than the previous growth rate that we have. So it's better to compare the improvement or the progress of the economy if we look at directly sa growth rate. So that is the essence of having growth rates. It would be easier for us to assess whether we are doing well or how much have we improved so far through the years. So let's have a real world example for that. So we will use the data of the Philippines sa GDP during 2019 to 2020, transition 2018 to 2020. So as you can see here, before the pandemic, we still had a positive growth rate. So from 5 to 6.7 by the end of the quarter sa 2019. And then, during dayon, the first quarter of 2020, di ba, if you can still remember, that was the time when we had the lockdown. So it was March, so that was still part of the first quarter. And right then and there, we incurred a negative 0.7% of growth rate. Wala ta nag-grow na negative pa gyud ta samot because of the closing of businesses. And 'di ba, at the same time, because of the lockdown, what happened was that there was no consumption anymore. And of course, we know that production is compelled by consumption. So since there were no people going out anymore from their homes, then therefore businesses were forced to close. And with that, since businesses were closed at that time, then there was no production anymore. And if there's no production, then that would decrease the GDP of the country. At the same time, it would also decrease the GNI. It's because nobody is already working. I mean, there are workers who were still there during the pandemic or during the onset of the pandemic. However, mga essential workers na lang. So gamay na lang kaayo. That was the reason why we reached an all-time low of negative zero point 0.7 during the first quarter. But it became even lower rock bottom during the second quarter of 2020, wherein we had a negative 16.9%. Grabe na, because that was the time wherein the restrictions were heightened and many people were not allowed to go out anymore. Like, super essential na lang yun ang mga businesses that were working during that time. But during the third quarter, restrictions were started to ease. That's why medyo ni gamay-gamay na. Although negative pagyapon. And even during the fourth quarter of 2020, wherein we experienced a negative 8.3% na growth. Di siya, na siya growth. At least nakuhaan ang iya ang pagka-negative. So that is for the data of the Philippines quarterly, but for the annual data of the GDP and the GNI for 2020, we incurred a total of 11.1 negative 11.1% of growth rate for GNI. And then for GDP, we have a negative 9.5 annual na siya ha, na growth rate for 2020. So that is how you analyze and that is how you understand growth rates or data from the government when they release growth rates. Nasabtan ba? Yes, Miles.
Kanang negative 11.1 siya na annual sa G1 or nadulot sa average.
The average. Yes lang ga. Technically, i-average na siya, but of course, there are statistical discrepancies. Remember what I told you yesterday, na there are unaccounted, and at the same time, they also consider the last part katong kon bitaw pag-end gyud sa fourth quarter. As you noticed here, tanawa ganining negative 12. 'Di ba here we have a negative 8.3 for fourth quarter. Pero kani siyang negative 12, this was the like end na gyud, pag-end na kibale sa December. So naagid na siya adjustments or mga statistical discrepancy. But in terms of solving for the annual na growth rate, gina-average na siya. Any other concern? Aray questions? Klaro ba? Nasabtan? Okay. Wala ni question, clarification, violent reaction. Are we good? Nasabtan ba? Okay. Sige ha. So now, since you are already done with the discussion on growth rates, then we will proceed with the worksheet. Wait lang ha. Here. Okay, so this will be the worksheet and you will do this one for the entire period. So for this worksheet, you have to get a piece of paper and solve for the growth rates by completing the table. As you can see on the table, you will have to solve for the growth rate of the GDP in 2014 and the GDP in 2015. Same with the GNI of 2014 and 2015. You will use the same formula in calculating the growth rate for both GDP and GNI. Now, just make sure that when you solve for the answers or for the growth rates, please show your solution and make sure to round your answers off to two decimal places. Again, show your solution because this is a total of this worksheet will be a total of 20 points. Each number is worth 5 points only if you show your solution. So please show the solution and then make sure to round off your answers to two decimal places. Once you are done answering, please take a picture of your answer and upload it in Silid. Okay? I will just be sending the link where you will be uploading your answers in a while. Wait lang. Pwede ra solutions right away lang ga. You're welcome. Here is the link where you will upload your answer.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes, Ian.
Chair, i-copy pa ang table, Chair. Dili na.
Pwede dili na.
Ay, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Solution na diretso, pwede ra. By the way, please make sure to upload your answer before the portal closes because after that one, I will be uploading the answer key. So if ever you are not able to answer the submit your answers, then makita na ninyo ang answer key. Di na nako nadawaton dayon after. Okay?